In trying to prepare for this introduction for Wendy, I thought I'd start by taking some notes about her accomplishments over the years. And by the end of 6 pages, I realized that I had really put down too many notes, and if I was going to read all these notes, you weren't going to get to hear from her at all. So I have significantly cut down on what I'm going to say about her, and put it just on this little card here now. I've known Wendy for many years, mostly through various ACM activities. Wendy's a fellow of the ACM. She's also a past president of ACM. She was the first person who was not a North American to hold that particular office. And she currently serves as the vice president of ACM Europe. Throughout her career, she's had a number of honors. Probably most of you have heard of some of these for her. She is a Dame Commander of the British Empire, a Fellow of the Royal Society. And you could ask, well, how did she get all these honors? Why is she so distinguished? It's through a history of scientific achievement and public service for which she's been honored all these years. As a bit of a bio, she received her PhD in mathematics from Southampton University, spent a few years away from Southampton, and then she returned there and became the first female professor in engineering that Southampton had. In her research, she was one of the first computer scientists to do work on multimedia and hypermedia and web technologies, and she's particularly well known for the semantic web. These various lines of research that she's been doing have influenced such things as the development of digital libraries and web science, which is a field that she and some of her colleagues helped create. She serves on many national and international boards, all of which help promote women in the sciences. And in terms of ACM, I have to say that it's in large part through Wendy's efforts that there are many women holding higher governance positions in the organization right now. So most of that information you could probably find out if you went out and you did a Google search about Wendy. So I'd like to tell you just quickly something that you wouldn't find if you did a Google search. On a personal level, Wendy is a very warm and gracious person, and someone I am just thrilled to call a friend. So I would like to introduce her now, Professor Dame Wendy Hall.
All right, is that working? Can you hear me at the back? Hello, you awake? I'm not sure I am, but we'll give it a go. It is a great pleasure to be here. It's actually been quite a long road, and I'm going to tell you a bit about getting, to ACM Europe and ACM Women Europe and my role in that, and I'll tell you a bit about that. What I thought I'd do this morning, because there's Vicky in that lovely introduction, thank you Vicky, and I owe some things to Vicky as well, so I think this is a mutual admiration society. I thought, because I really think that at these conferences, I hate just talking about, putting up stats about the lack of women in computing, and I like to talk technical. So I'm going to sort of tell you about my career, and it always feels a bit pretentious because I'm going to talk about me, but I hope in doing that, in sharing my experiences and how I've done what I've done, it will inspire you to maybe do more yourselves. And so when Rayanne, I don't think I ever did an abstract, did I, Rayanne? Did I do an abstract? I can't remember. Anyway, I came up with a title about how to enjoy a career as a woman in computing. And I have given this talk, a couple of people might have heard a similar one before. To me, it's all about networking, and that's why I've always belonged to women's organisations, although I don't like keep going on and on about being a woman in anything. I like to win things because I'm the best, or one of the best. So let's kick off now. Yes, all right, so there's me. My life bits. We put this collage together when we were doing a Memories for Life project, And of course nowadays all our memories are on, well, they're actually owned by Facebook and Google and Twitter, and we have to do something about that. But when I was a kid, it was photos in photo albums, and that's me. And I never know to this day, that's my brother and I in our academic hats and gowns in my grandmother's garden in East London and Walthamstow. You can still see the background, the bombing after the war. Who put the gowns on as a prescient? I mean, clearly my brother wasn't at school. I was probably at school. Who would have known I was going to become an academic? I had the most fantastic childhood growing up in, well, I said recently in an interview in the Times Higher Ed, they said, how did your growing up in London shape your life? And I said, well, I grew up in London in the 60s. What more is to be said? I was lucky. I had parents who had their young lives had been ruined by the war, and my father was in a prison of war for 5 years, came home, they got married 10 days after VE Day and were married for 62 years, and they were determined to give their children a better life than they had had. I don't think they quite realised how much I was going to do, but they were always very encouraging. It's me on my wedding day. I've been married 34 years to the wonderful Peter. And it's me with Tony Blair. That was the beginning of my sort of influence. That going on that trip, the EPSRC got me on this trip to go to India with Tony Blair and with a load of other scientists, and we've remained friends ever since. So people like Paul Nurse, I met on that trip. He's now president of the Royal Society. And it's these networks that you build that bonding on these, you know, sort of jetting around India, you know, another day, another flight, another presentation, and then in the bar afterwards. That's when you get to know people. And of course, there's several times I've met the Queen, and then there's David Beckham. People ask about that one. It was completely coincidental. We happened to be in the same hotel on the same day on 9/11, would you believe? The Twin Towers had just gone down. Anyway, he is gorgeous. I actually started out as a mathematician. I wanted to be a doctor, a medic. So I was doing my A-levels in the late 60s. Went to university in 1971, and my headmistress, I went to an all-girls grammar school, and my headmistress at the time, you did sort of what they said, mostly, or there was a bit of rebel in the sixth form. That's another whole story that my mother will tell you about, but I wanted to be a medic, so I wanted to do 4 A-levels, including chemistry, and she wouldn't let me. She said, nope, medicine's not a career for women. And in those days, of course, it wasn't. She said, you're really good at maths, just do maths, go to Cambridge, read mathematics. So I said, okay, I'll do that, but I didn't apply to Cambridge. That was my little bit of rebellion. I applied to several red brick type universities, thinking that I wouldn't, anyway, it's another story why I didn't go to Cambridge, and I suppose really because my parents didn't have any money, and I thought I wouldn't actually fit in. That was my view of the world then. And I ended up in Southampton, just an hour from London, so I knew I could take the washing home. And see my boyfriend at the time. So I read mathematics, and I loved it. I just loved. I was always a natural at mathematics, and I enjoyed reading mathematics at university. I thought I'd be a teacher. Always enjoyed, because I wasn't going to be a medic. So well, actually, I like people and teaching. So I thought I'd do that, and then they persuaded me to do a PhD in pure mathematics, which I absolutely adored. So this is, there's a few photos in here. It's Pete and I on my I can't remember if that was mine or his. We graduated he was a year after me. But anyway, that's us in our Southampton gowns at Southampton on a very miserable day. That must have been his graduation, I think, because it was the winter. So that was my thesis, automorphisms and coverings of Klein surfaces. And in fact, I published a paper in 2012 from my thesis. That's how. So it's quite a long story, so I won't tell you now. But thanks to my supervisor, who was wonderful, there was some work in my thesis that had not been published, and 40 years later, it was still undiscovered, as he said. And so he, when he retired, wrote the paper with my name on it. And so I'm quite proud of that in a funny sort of way. I just loved it, but this was a time when universities were contracting. There were hardly any jobs. Every job I applied for, there were 100 applicants. I wanted to teach in higher education. So I couldn't get a job as a mathematician. So I applied for jobs. I applied for a job at a university in the northeast here as a teaching maths to engineers. It was in the maths department. It's a 1-year temporary job. And I got on the train, went all the way up to the northeast, and went into the interview. And it was in the days when, after the interview in academia, you were all kept behind afterwards. And then they came out and said, "You've got the job, the rest of you can go." All right? And in fact, often they would keep you there until the person they were offering the job to had accepted it, and then they'd let you go. So it was very different to how it is now. And I went into the interview panel, and there were about 6 or 8 men on this interview panel, mostly professors. This was for a 1-year temporary lectureship, teaching maths to engineers, and did the interview, sat in the room with everybody else, all the other applicants were men. And they came out and they offered the job to this guy from Australia. And okay, he had got a bit of teaching experience. I'd just come out of my PhD, so all I'd ever done was seminars. And then the head of department called me into his office and he said, "Wendy, I really wanted to give you the job, but the others wouldn't give it to you because you're a woman." That was my first interview. And this was in 1977. You just sort of accepted that. I think the Inequality Act had just become law, or maybe it was on the cusp of becoming law in the UK. So they could say things like that. And the reason that they thought they didn't want to give me the job was because they thought I was 24. I suppose I looked very young for my age, and they didn't think I could control a class of male engineers. So I just accepted it, went back on the train. The next week I went for an interview at Oxford Poly, as was, now Oxford Brookes University, for the same sort of job, 1 year, teaching maths to engineers. They gave me the job on the Thursday. I started lecturing on the Monday. So when you think about, all these induction periods and all that, I got the job on the Thursday, and on the Monday I was teaching Laplace transform, differential equations, stuff I hadn't done since first year undergrad. I was preparing it on the way up on the train. It's a long story. The car broke down, so I had to go on the train on the Monday morning. Missed my first lecture. Can you believe? My first job. I've always been late ever since. So I turn up. I'm at Oxford Poly. I have never been there before except for the interview. I had no idea where the lecture theatre was. So I had to go to the office, to the department office, dump my suitcase because I had nowhere to live that night, sleep that night, and I say to the secretary, "Could you show me where the lecture theatre is? This is for the 10 o'clock, having missed the 9 o'clock. So I go towards this lecture theatre. She sits down that corridor. I've never taught before, and I walk in, and there's a whiteboard. I'd never used a whiteboard before. I'd only ever used blackboards, as mathematicians still do. And I walk in, and of course they think I'm the secretary come to cancel the class because they'd heard the rumour that this new lecturer hadn't turned up for the 9 o'clock. So they thought I was the secretary come to cancel the class. When I said I was the lecturer, I got a few catcalls, whistles and all that, and I started teaching Laplace transforms. And I think if I can do that, I can do bloody anything. So it was a baptism of fire, and I wouldn't recommend it to anybody. It's not the way to start for anybody to start someone else's teaching career off. But anyway, that's another. I could tell you long stories about all sorts of stories about what happened in my early days. But what happened then was I then got a job teaching back in Southampton because Pete was there, and so I looked back in Southampton and I taught maths at a higher education college, and this was the 80s, so we're in this period coming up to 84, and the personal computers were coming out, and they said to me, "Wendy, you are a mathematician, you must know about computing." Well, I'd hated computer science at university. It had been Fortran and punch card and paper tape, and it just, to me, who loved this world of abstract mathematics, was something I didn't want to know. But when the personal computers came out, and my boss at the higher education college said, take a Commodore PET home for the summer and teach. So I took it home and I taught myself basic computing over the summer. You know, capital B-A-S-I-C. And as Dijkstra is well known to have said, if BASIC is your first programming language, you are mentally mutilated for life. And I have been. I've never been a good programmer. I self-taught basic programming is about as bad as it gets. But what got me excited, I was working with a colleague at the college who showed me how to put pictures on computers, and I thought, wow, this is just going to transform education. And I was at a college of education, so we started putting on courses for teachers about putting pictures and stuff on computers, graphics. And suddenly there was a whole world opening up for me, and I applied for a job back at Southampton, the university, as a lecturer in computer science, which amazed me as much as everybody else that I was doing this. But there I was, and started teaching Pascal programming as they were doing there, and the rest, as they say, is history. I'd gone off and done a master's because I thought if I'm going to move into computer science from this abstract world of maths, I need to know what I'm talking about. So I did a part-time master's at City, and that really kicked off the rest of my career. I sort of never looked back, really. I still love the maths, and I always think one day I might get back to it. In fact, there is a world I might be dipping into as I stop being dean. But anyway, so what's Lord Mountbatten got to do with my career? Well, back at Southampton, I really got interested in this whole idea of what we now call multimedia. But in those days, what we do today was just science fiction. The idea of having a video on a computer was just science fiction, let alone on a mobile that you could carry around in your pocket. But so I started playing around. I think I've got a picture, actually. Let's get to that. So what did Lord Mountbatten of Burma have to do with this? Well, that's me in his archive at Southampton in 1987. This was a seminal year for both me and the world, in the sense that this is the year of the first hypertext conference. Hypertext being the idea of linking from one object to another using a computer, and hypermedia being the idea of linking between multimedia objects on a computer. And I learnt those words from the famous Ted Nelson. I met him around this time. I met Doug Engelbart, who invented the mouse and Windows and so on. And these guys really inspired me with this vision of the future of us being able to do all this over a network and have information that was not just code, not just text, but visual and audio as well. So this is the archive. It's full of about 250,000 text documents, 50,000 photos, sound files, films on tape. And looking with the archivist, we talked about what if we could digitize all this. And in those days, you put stuff on the 12-inch old analog video discs, silver ones, and here we are. We built up this system called Microcosm to deal with multimedia information in a hypermedia way. And this is me around the early 90s. At a Microcosm workstation somewhere. I can't see it, so unfortunately. There will be a laser disc somewhere in that configuration. That was multimedia in about 1990. And then when they say I'm a pioneer of multimedia, I didn't write a line of that code, but it was me that had the vision to put all the project together. And I had a wonderful team of people. And Carol, who's going to talk to you later, came down, did her sabbatical with us in 94. And so we were all part of this. So that's when we started doing work together on what we now call semantic web. But it was a very, very exciting time. It always is, I suppose. But I was young. And the story I will tell you, though, is that around this time, I went on a sabbatical to the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor in 1989. That was a turning point in my career. I don't know if I put it in my slide here. Is that I went there and they were doing lots of stuff with HyperCard and video, and it was all sort of can-do. And I'd come back to Southampton, and my boss, David Barron, bought me this sort of equipment, and it took probably most of the recurrent grant from the Southampton Department of Computer Science at the time. A laser display was £1,000, and that was a huge amount of money in those days. And there was another professor there, I won't name him, Carol will know who he is, I think, who was a bit grumpy. And he told me one day in public, in the coffee room, or top of the stairs or something, can't remember, that if I carried on doing this multimedia stuff, there was no future for me either at Southampton or in computer science. Because, yeah, you know who it is. It was probably around the time you were there, close to, when I was having my nervous breakdown. Because it wasn't computer science. And so if we were going to compete, I expect there was one of the early refs coming up, or REEs, or whatever they were called. And we were thinking about the papers. And of course, my papers were not in computer science journals, because they weren't as computer science was in those days. It wasn't about operating systems or programming languages or compilers. It was about this new stuff, pictures, video, and what? And anyway, luckily, David Barron supported me and gave me, and I had lots of good colleagues and friends, and it was very pioneering days. And I think the lesson is, you know, have the courage of your convictions. Of course, I'm doing this in a world where I would like to say the point, by the way, that I ended up, of course, much higher up in the hierarchy than the professor that got at me that day. And of course, he was being very defensive, aggressive, because he could see what was happening. But I ended up on the ref panel, multimedia, and all this stuff in our well-known journals, many of which I helped to start. But I mean, actually, if you there is a way, and we have been criticised for this at Southampton. You know, if you want to get ahead somewhere, you start your own journal or your own conference, and get people to come, and then you make it something you can publish in. But that's not what happened at all. Well, that's one. Now, I just set the context of what. So I'm not the only woman in the department, but I want to just set the context of where we are in terms of the gender issues. I started thinking about the lack of women in computing in 1987. There's a lady called Jill Lovegrove who was a lecturer, older than me, so she was a senior lecturer, and I arrived at Southampton. She really helped me a lot to get into the whole world of computer science. And we got, in October 1987, or 86 probably, we looked at the registration lists for our computer science degree course, and we realised we had 3 years of students, year 1, 2, 3, with no women at all. Not one woman student in the whole. And I remember emailing, I think it was Carol, but we were all on the email, which was very new at the time, talking about, is it just us? Why aren't there any women here? What's happened to them? Because there used to be. And I remember talking to Carol at a conference in Lancaster. Well, before this, we started, I think, well, possibly Carol started it, WIC, can't remember, Women in Computing. We had a conference in Lancaster. And we got together to start talking about what had happened to these women, where had they gone? And Jill and I wrote our first paper about this in 87. So when I hear the talks about we must make a difference, this is bloody a long time ago, right? And you know, I feel like I've been doing this forever and not making much of a difference. So I'm still doing it, and still. But one story I will tell. I'm very vulnerable, as I said, doing multimedia in a computer science department. But we actually abandoned the WIC. This was a lesson I think we all learned. We had a WIC mailing list, and we abandoned it because the men took it over and started talking about the things they wanted to talk about. And there's always this issue about, do you do this stuff exclusively, just the women, or do you do it in a mixed gender environment? And it's the lesson I've learned is that there are times when it needs to be just women. Occasionally, you just need to be able to talk about what we like to talk about, particularly if it's issues to do with in the workplace. But actually, the most important thing is this isn't just a women's issue. We work best when we have male champions to work with us, or work with them, because it is so important this isn't just seen as a women's issue, because then we're like the oppressed minority, and we never get out of that. So it is really, really important, I think, to have mixed support networks, campaigns, but just occasionally you need those events where you can feel you can talk about anything you like. But moving on from there, these were the figures. I'll show you it graphically, the same figures graphically. So this is 1978 to 92, the first year intake figures. It used to be called UCAS, or was it UCA? I forget which way around it was. Anyway, the UCA statistics for female and male students. So you guess the men are the top line, the women are the bottom line, and you see what happens. So there's about a third of the cohort in doing computer science courses were women initially. And you see what happens in the mid-80s. The numbers drop absolutely and relatively. And this is when the government was growing computer science at universities. And this is when the number of women applying and doing computer science dropped off. Now, what happened in the middle of the mid-80s? The personal computers came along. And this is my theory. There were other things as well. But personal computers came along, and there's a long story about how they were introduced in classrooms, but basically there wasn't much you could do with them except program in BASIC, or if you really wanted to be advanced, you could program in assembly language, or you could play war games. And they were sold as toys for the boys. And in the West, where very well-intentioned people, governments, local authorities, school teachers, introduced computers into the classroom, one computer in a classroom. I remember Seymour Papert saying, just imagine if someone invented a pencil and you put one pencil in a classroom 1 day a week. How is that going to impact on education? We were putting a computer in a school, so kids never saw it, nobody was trained how to do it, and the best teachers, the people who knew what to do, were taken off into centres. Meanwhile, the marketing campaigns from the companies selling these things were targeted at men and their sons, because there was really nothing else. And actually, we've never really recovered from that. That's the scary thing. We just haven't recovered from it. So I did my sabbatical. I went off and started becoming a hypermedia person, went to the conferences, met Tim at the conference, Tim Berners-Lee in 1990 at the Paris Hypertext Conference. That was my first paper at an international conference. Went to the first ACM conference, and my first ACM conference was ACM Hypertext 91. Never dreamt I'd end up president of that organisation. That's where I first saw Tim demo the World Wide Web. This was a demo. I haven't got time for all these stories really, but this was a demo. This was the conference that famously rejected Tim's paper about the World Wide Web. Because, well, it wasn't a very good paper, but it was a bloody good idea. So, of course, what you do, and they rejected our paper on microcosm, so what you do is you submit a poster or a demo, so you can still get the funding to go to the conference if you're lucky. So we all ended up demoing, Tim and Robert Caillou were demoing the World Wide Web, as they were calling it, they'd given it that name. We were demoing microcosm about 3 desks down. And everybody else was outside drinking margaritas because there was a tequila fountain outside, as only you have in Texas. And but that was the first time I saw Tim demo the web. Anyway, so we were foolishly launched our microcosm system as a product in 1994, just as the web was taking off. That was free. Microcosm wasn't. Actually, we did quite well with it, but it never made me a millionaire. And I got my chair after a nervous breakdown that year that Carol saw. Not really, but I was very in a dodgy state that year because I was going for promotion, and it was hard because there were no other women. And no matter how you try to think that doesn't matter, it does. But anyway, I had a lot of support from mentors, and male mentors as well as women. But I'm still feeling quite vulnerable, so it never really goes away, in a sense. I haven't got time to tell you all the stories. This is my favourite slide. I love talking about the story of the web. And I haven't got time to tell you all those stories, but basically my career has sort of followed the web in a way. And some could say I jumped on a bandwagon. But the idea with the web, which was, you give it away for free, and this was Tim's legacy to the world, really. I'm not going to try and... Just imagine if he'd been a Bill Gates and we were paying to use the web. So you'd be paying per click, maybe, or you'd certainly be paying for the software to set up a site. And his thesis was that either everybody's going to use it or nobody will. So there must be no economic barrier, no financial barrier, no charging, This is why MOOCs are going to work, by the way. It's another whole story. The story in the web, always, and you think of what's come following, is you see, Google doesn't emerge till nearly 10 years. We had to build a web before we knew how to search it. Right? This is all web sciencey stuff. This is very important. It's like you have to build a semantic web before you know how to deal with it. And this is hard. It's hard getting over the tipping points when nobody's using something to everybody. But then you get the Googles and the Facebooks and the Amazons and so on emerging. Amazon starts in the mid-90s. You get the dot-com boom and bubble. It was bound to burst because when you look at it, you're trying to do shopping on the internet. And if you remember what it was like in the 90s when you had no broadband and no Wi-Fi, you can see on that chart where they emerged, we used to call it the World Wide Wait because it was so slow, the modems, you got that brrr, and then it would time out, or you'd try and download a photo or graphic and it would go like this and then hang. It was hopeless. You couldn't possibly put a shopping catalogue online. And anybody who, the idea of this shopping, there was no security for your payments. I mean, we weren't ready for shopping online. So when the dot-com bubble burst, and a lot of people lost a lot of money, people said, well, I remember reading one of the broadsheets in the US saying, that's the end of shopping on the internet. We've proved categorically we don't like shopping on the internet. It's just the technology wasn't there. And now look at what's happening to the retail industry. So the browsers become more interactive and we get the social networks, and there's whole stories here I could tell if I was giving a full web science talk, but I want to tell you how I have emerged out of this. So I was very lucky. I had a vice-chancellor who supported me. In '95, he gave me a fellowship, a university fellowship, and I had a year, and I used that year to write a real fellowship proposal, and I got an EPSRC Senior Research Fellowship. They were like gold dust. That gave me 6 years to just do my research. And this is where my phrase, the shortlist is shorter for women, comes in, because in 1996, at a very young age, comparatively, considering the membership of EPSRC Council at the time, I was invited to go on to EPSRC Council. And that was really a springboard for influence. And I guess having got the senior fellowship, they wanted a computer scientist. I was one of the first computer scientists to get one of these wonderful fellowships. And I think they said, oh, that's it, we need a woman, we need a computer scientist, tick, tick, on. And I was. In those days, you just got a phone call. These days, you have to apply and all that. And then people started to notice me. And this is when life starts to get busy, because that's when you can't duck the issue. So I get invited to be chair of BCS Publications, and then sort of like cream, I float to the top. No, basically, if I'm involved in something, I have to organise it. I end up organising whatever I do if I'm interested in it. So I became Vice President Publications BCS. That got the attention of the ACM. So I was asked to go on the ACM Publications Board. Where's President of the BCS? Oh, I suppose that's probably the next slide. So I've got enough... what's the word I want, attention now. The spotlight is on me enough. Somebody, I know, put me forward to be a commander of the British Empire. And I thought, my fellowship finished. I thought, well, now it's time to see if I want to be a manager. So I said I'd be head of ECS. I decided then I didn't want to be a manager. So why did I end up as dean? Oh. But, so stupidly, while I was head of ECS, I was elected to become president of the British Computer Society, which is something I loved doing. That's a year, although you're deputy president before and past president afterwards. But there's nothing as past as a past president. 1 minute you're leading the organisation, the next day you're nothing. And I've experienced that 3 or 4 times. It's quite, but it's the same for everybody, men and women. And in fact, we've got Liz Bacon is about to become the president of the BCS in the next month. So we have now, we have good influence in BCS. Do join the BCS as well as ACM. It's. I met the formidable Sue Black, who many of you will have heard of course, and she formed BCS Women. I don't take the credit for it, but I was able to help her do that. I set up the BCS Women's Forum, which lives on in another form, but Rebecca George is now in charge of that, and I believe she'll be president down the line. She blames me entirely for the time she's having to spend on it, but she's doing a great job. And one of the most important things happened to me was I got somehow, probably because of the people I'd met on that trip to India with Tony Blair, I got onto invited to be on the Prime Minister's Council for Science and Technology. It's all about networking and who you know. They're not, and I can assure you what I'm learning is when I take the years out to do management and I'm stuck in Southampton more than I'm in London, there are lots of people that will fill that vacuum that you leave very, very quickly. You become yesterday's person. And if you want influence and leadership roles, it's all about being out there and doing it, which actually gets very tiring and often isn't. I haven't got children. I chose not to have them, but if you have a family, it's really hard in those years. You're going to do your job, but to do the extras when you've got a family is really, really difficult. I understand that. I'm an engineer. I became a chartered engineer through the BCS, and I got involved in running the Royal Academy. I was senior vice president for 3 years. And you said about being in a room with lots of women. Go to Grace Hopper. If you ever get a chance, go to a Grace Hopper conference in the US. If you want, how many women go to that, Valerie? Huh? 4,000 now. You go to this huge conference centre and all the loos are women. They change all the loos. It's the only place you go. The men have to queue because all the loos become female loos. But it is the most amazing experience, and I love these sorts of events. And it's wonderful to have this here. In the UK. So anyway, I was beginning to win awards. And then tell this story quickly, Wendy. So 2004, I'll go to the web conference every year. Tim goes every year. So whatever happened, we always saw each other at the web conference. And we were in New York in 2004, and he said to me, this semantic web thing, which is always part of his vision, the idea that the web would be a web of data as well as a web of linked data as well as a web of linked documents and linked people. He said it's just, when it's not taking off, and the reason it wasn't taking off is because it had been taken over by the artificial intelligence community who want to prove that black is white. But that aside, how do I get people to put the data out? How do we get it out of the rut it's in and get it moving? So by that time, Nigel Shadbolt had moved to Southampton, and he knows a bit about AI and knowledge-based systems, and together we wrote a paper about the semantic web, revisiting it and saying, actually, this stuff's really simple. Put the data out there and link it. Put the data out in a standard form that machines can read, and link it, and we'll have a semantic web. And that's really the journey we've been on. And then as part of this, we looked back at that slide I showed you about the web, or we didn't look at that slide, but we looked back at the story of the web, and we said, well, actually, the reason why we don't understand how things are working is because it isn't just about the technology. Tim invented the web, he didn't create it. We create it because we put the content on it. It's all about people. So you can't understand this stuff just from the point of view, if you look at it from a technological point of view. You have to look at it from an interdisciplinary point of view and think about issues of human behaviour, organisational behaviour. And so we put those ideas together, and it's lost in the mist of time actually where we came up with the name. We thought of the idea in 2004, and we launched the Web Science Research Initiative at MIT. So that's me looking very jet-lagged with Tim, Danny Weitzner, Nigel Shadbolt. Danny's a lawyer. He did a term with Obama as on internet policy in the White House. But he's at MIT with Tim. And that's the man at the podium is Rob Brooks, famous robotics professor who was chair of computer science and AI at the CSAIL lab at the time. We had a press conference at MIT. And this was a sort of, what's going to happen? What are people going to think of it? We were like launching this thing. We gave it the name Web Science, and I always say there's two things I don't like about Web Science. One is web, the other is science. Because people who aren't technical think web science is very technical, and people who are technical think it's not about engineering, and of course it is all those things. But we had the quote from Eric Schmidt on the day saying we need this is right. They never gave us any money. Well, they have supported us, of course, in various ways. But we were at MIT and we saw, I mean, the power of that organisation. We were on the front page of MIT that day, talking about knowing how to do comms, and you saw the press release roll around the world because it's Tim saying something. So you market that and you see the press release going around the world, and then you think, now what? What do we do next? How are we going to get people? What is this stuff? Is this worthy of a new sort of intellectual discipline, or as interdisciplinary as it is? Anyway, we've kept going, and we have I've organised things, there's conferences, and we now run it through a not-for-profit trust called the Web Science Trust. It took us 3 years to get that far. Meanwhile, I took on I'm thinking about making a difference globally, because this whole idea of launching web science is a very global thing. It's not just of the UK, it had to be done around the world. And I'm at the same time thinking about, what's the organisation that helps really make a difference in our world of computer science. So I spent more time with the ACM, was elected deputy president in 2006, and then I loved being president of the ACM. I mean, they're still in China. Of all the accolades I've got, when I go to China, they introduce me as the past president of the ACM. That is because it's president, you see, as opposed to dean or dame or any of the other things they might say, which they don't. So I'm thinking about internationalisation and giving women a voice at the top table. I wasn't the first female president of the ACM, there were 3 or 4 before me, but I was the first president from outside America, North America. Maria Clave is Canadian, so I have to say outside North America. But the thing, my 2 agendas were internationalisation, as I say, giving women a voice. So I worked with the team at the time. It was Elaine Woker was chair of ACM-W, to change the governance so it had a seat on council. So Valerie, who is here now as ACM-W chair, has a seat on council, right? So important. Otherwise, it's just, I'm seeing this in the Royal Academy now, right? I'm chair of their diversity group, and I used to report directly to council. Now I'm reporting to a committee. And you just see it going down the chain of command. And so it's so important to have the voice at the top table, which is why Rayanne is on ACM Europe Council. Yes? As chair of ACM-W Europe. So for my sins, I spent the year travelling around the world, and we set up ACM India, ACM Europe, and ACM China. You may say, why ACM Europe? Interestingly enough, the ACM is always, people think the A stands for American, and it isn't. It's the Association of Computing Machinery. It's really hard to explain to people what that is, so they don't usually try and bother. But it was always conceived of, people thought of it as an American organisation because it's run out of the office in New York, even though all of us publish in the journals, go to the conferences, and in fact, more than 50% of the membership of the ACM is from outside America, and a large chunk, I can't remember exactly what percentage, 30-something% is Europe? Can you remember? 28, yeah. 28% of the membership of the ACM is in Europe. So the point of ACM Europe was to try and give more value to the members in Europe. It wasn't a membership drive, it was just, we have a lot of members in Europe, how can we best serve that membership? India and China were very different because these are areas that are churning out computer science graduates and putting huge amounts of money, and there were very few members in those areas, and so we tried to raise the profile of the ACM through regional councils there, and they're both very different. ACM India's just had its annual conference, and I think is going from strength to strength. ACM China, we've done a deal with the main professional society in China, and so all their members automatically become members of ACM, and so it looks like we've got lots of members in China. It's a bit of a backdoor thing, but at least we're now translating some of the CACM stuff into Chinese. So, there's been lots of work with the computer scientists in China because they are doing, the government is pouring tons of money into research and training in China, in our world, and it's very important we know what they're doing as much as they know what we write about in English or American. And I supported each of those councils. Well, it's very hard in China, that's another story. But ACM India and ACM Europe have strong ACM-W committees. And that's why we're here today, because of ACM-W in Europe. How much difference have we really made? I'm just about coming to the end, Vicky, in case you're worrying. Well, I've just considered myself so lucky, as well as meeting the Queen when she gave me my CBE and my DBE. I've had lunch with her, and that, 3 hours in the company of someone like that is just, I think she's wonderful. So my mum, who's now 94, had to go to this investiture in a wheelchair, so she got a front row seat. So that's my mum and my brother and my husband sitting in the front row at Windsor Castle. Just so exciting. But actually this one is the FRS. I never expected to get an FRS, Fellow of the Royal Society, which is the top scientific recognition in the UK, because your peers, and it's very, very competitive. Everybody wants to be one, and it's incredibly competitive. And there weren't many computer scientists. The ones that were there when I started thinking about this stuff, it was like Robin Milner and Tony Hoare, and they were theoreticians. Anyway, there have been, there's a number gone before me, and we all, what you do is you haul the others up, okay? So the ones that make it, you put down the ladder and you haul them up. And so, there are people in the society that nominated me. And the thing about this, when you get your FRS, apart from the honour, I must have just come back from holiday, mustn't I? So this is Martin Rees, saying thank you, and this is my class of whatever it was. And this is signing the book. Now, this is the book that Newton signed. So when they set up the society in the 17th century, 353 years ago, whatever it was, 354 years ago now, they got this big book, very prescient, and every fellow that's ever been of the Royal Society has signed that book in quill pen with ink. And so Hooke and Newton and all that lot are right at the beginning here, and you've got about a quarter of the book to go. But I don't suppose I won't be one of the people worrying about that. But that was just huge honour. So, and Dean, well, I'm nearly finishing being Dean. When I did this talk last time, I can do management, but it's not what I want to spend my life doing, so I'm stepping down as Dean in July, so I can get back to doing what I want to do. I'm told in Southampton, the students told me the other week, Southampton WWW stands for What Wendy Wants. So I'm not sure that's good or bad. Anyway, my passion is this interdisciplinary. This is an old slide now. I should have put the new one in, but I just was too tired last night to really do much. And it's very because it's interdisciplinary, we take students onto our program really from any relevant discipline. At least 50% of them are women. So finally, I've got a cohort of students who are not all male, and I have a wonderful time with these people. They're doing the most fantastic work, and I absolutely love it. And this is what I want to spend my time doing more of. You can see, I don't know if you know Les Carr. He's involved. Kathy's there. Did Nigel make that photo? Can't see. Anyway, we're still all working as a team on this stuff. And I left this photo in. I last gave this talk in India at the ACM India conference a year ago. And I went out there. Before the conference, I went to meet the students. This is a group of computer science students in India. And when you go to when I go to India, Malaysia, not so much China, but the Middle East, many countries in the world, you walk into a room of computer science students and at least half, if not the majority, are women. It's very different culturally, which says that it's not that women can't do this stuff, it's just that the culture doesn't encourage them to do it. There's all sorts of issues, of course, these women here at the front, there's the teacher in the blue, and the rest are all the women who organise the ACM student chapter at this college in Chennai. And you know, all the organisers are women. The guys are all hanging to the back. And I had a wonderful day with them. It's about a 50-50 mix. And I was out in India 3 weeks ago, and I went to a company called Cognizant, which you've probably not heard of. It's an American company, but it's mostly in India. And emphasis, of course, is in India, and there's Tata Consultancy Services. I walked into this huge building, in Cognizant's new building, on this science park, and there's a foyer full of chairs, about 300 young people, about 50% of them women. They're all there for what they called a drop-in interview day. They're all graduate software engineers applying for jobs at Cognizant. You think, oh God, 300 people, they're after a few jobs and they're not going to get them. Cognizant alone is employing 30,000 new software engineers this year. And they expect to do the same or more next year. And that's nothing compared to Tata Consultancy Services, which are up at the 50,000 level a year. And these 90%, they reckoned, of the people, they'd already been through a filter. 90% of the people coming for that interview that day were going to get jobs. And as I said, 50% of them were women. Now, there's issues about what happens in India, different culture, what happens when they have families, same in the Middle East. I mean, there's all sorts, it's a very, very complex issue. But my point is, these women love programming. They told me about how much they loved it when I was there. I also like, because they call you ma'am. Actually, it's an age thing. It's nothing to do with me being a dame. It's the respect you get. You don't get here these days. Anyway, oh, have I got time to show this video? We didn't try it. Maybe I won't. I think I won't, because I haven't got time. We haven't tried it out, and I'd rather you ask me some questions. There's a lovely fast show video, look at it on YouTube, where there are 3 guys trying to get into the car. They've left the keys in the car door, and the woman comes along and says, what you need is to cut a tennis ball in half and create the vacuum, and then it will suck the car lock up. And they all completely ignore her. And she says, there's a sports shop down the road. And about half a minute later, one of the guys says, you know what you have to do is you have to cut a tennis ball in half and pull the lock up, and there's a sports shop just down the road. And the woman goes, don't you ever listen to what we say? And you can see it on YouTube. It's a classic example. It happens to me. Even now, when I'm dean, I walk into a meeting and they talk to my male colleagues. Right? And it's just I celebrate the gender differences, right? I love men. I love being a woman, and I'm going to go shopping today. You may see me disappear this afternoon. But there is something about, I mean, I think it might be physiological. It might be that, you know, our voices are on a different level. Maybe they don't hear. I don't know, but this is my last slide. The reason why I think it's so important to network is because that helps us find our voice. And we'll find our voices here today, and then you will go back to your daily life, and you will that will help you find your voice in your daily life. And increasingly today, this is old now, there's lots of things bubbling up of the community, of the youngsters saying, hey, look, we love programming, you know, Girls Who Code and all this. We need to support them, because they'll be the leaders of this community tomorrow. So all power to their elbow. Thank you. Quick questions? Go to it then, off you go. The web? Yes. Okay, so the web is 25 years old. They're having a big celebration. It's actually part of a marketing campaign, really, a profile-raising campaign. It's 25 years in March since Tim wrote the document that defined the web. The first website, you know, was 24 years ago. So there's going to be lots of 25th anniversaries of the web coming up. I think we're at a bit of a crossroads. And actually, the thing that has highlighted this is what's happened. It's not just the web, it's the internet, of course, that the web sits on. And it's the whole issue of who owns what, who governs and how, and what you can do with what on this ecosystem. And I think the reason it's happening now is because it's matured. It's coming out of adolescence. We're certainly way out of babyhood. I mean, in the early days, nobody cared because people thought it was irrelevant to them. And then it was a lot of excitement and, oh, look what you can do. And then we got into, in the adolescent years, you get the excitement of it growing up, and then you get the scary stuff. You get the crime and the security requirements and the privacy issues and the trust issues and, how can we keep our children safe on the internet? And that's, of course, we want this stuff to be a force for good for humanity, but human behaviour says that people are going to try and do bad things with it and for it. But I think the big issue was, which has got Tim and Vince Cerf, president of the ACM, and others really concerned, is the leaks, the Snowden leaks about the surveillance. And of course the intelligence forces will say, we have to do that to keep you safe. But they should bloody tell us what they're doing. I think that's the issue, the transparency and what rights they have. Now, I want to be kept safe, right? And we all do. I mean, we put up with surveillance cameras in the car parks because we want to be safe. And we know what they're allowed and not allowed to do with the tapes that are in those cameras. And we need to know what our rights are and what control we have over our data and who's allowed to do what with our data. We need to know what our government's responsibilities are. And of course the companies as well. There's that lovely joke about the cartoon about someone opening the door, and there's a knock on the door, they open the door, and there's Steve Jobs there saying, I've come for your child. Didn't you read it in the terms and conditions? And, so it's the companies too, it's not just the governments, but there's the whole issue. This thing has grown up of the people, of us, and it's who has the right to do what, who governs what. And I've just been asked to be on and accepted a commission on internet, a global commission on internet governance, because I think this is the most important thing we face at the moment. Because the natural reaction to what America and the UK have done with surveillance is countries saying, well, we don't want all our internet traffic going through the States. Let's set up our own internet. Well, that will kill it. Well, technically, can they do it? But so I really think we're at quite a crossroads, and you'll see a lot about this coming out, this debate. But I think there's a wonderful future, and I look forward to the 50th anniversary of, well, the one thing's for sure, it won't be the same.
So there's a mic, and someone's got the mic, and if you have a question, just raise your hand, and this person will bring you the mic so that we're ready for the next question.
There's a mic there, I think.
Yeah.
Hi, my name's Kate. That was an amazing talk. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
So you talked about how you started worrying about women, and I forget if it was 1984 or 1987. And, it's been a long time now, and I feel like things aren't getting better, and we still have these statistics, like 63% of women in STEM get sexually harassed, which I wonder is the 37% of women not notice. And so the numbers are bad, I think, because our experience is bad and that they'll change when our experience is better. But I think what we've been doing is clearly not working. So what do we do next? How do we keep going?
I wish I had an answer. I wish I had an easy answer. It isn't easy. I talk about constant vigilance. I've worked actually, there was a lovely quote at the beginning about the people who do this for a long time are the ones to what, because actually you just have to keep at it and at it and at it. As I said, there's deeply cultural issues. You go to different countries and it's very, very different. So my message to you is what I think the answer is. It is about networking, and it is about, but it isn't just about being in women's networks, it's about networking across the board. We have to make this an issue that men get. And I think for example, little things make a difference, and the Athena Awards are beginning to make a little difference in STEM. Now, it's interesting because the boys learn to play the games. So there's now Athena, you know what Athena is? The awards to say your department is doing diversity. I mean, I see Manchester's got what is it, bronze or silver? Southampton got rejected first time round. We've now got bronze in computer science. But the thing is that the heads of departments, who are mostly men, learn to play the game. Say, right, you, and I mean, hopefully they ask men as well as women, get us an Athena Award. And then it becomes a bit of a tick box, and people put it on their CV, and you're into we've got to make it real and stick. We have an Athena Bronze Award, and then somebody pointed out that this selection committee, I've just stood down as dean, so there's a selection committee for the next dean. There are no female candidates. There's no other woman in my faculty that could be dean. They'd have to go outside to get a female candidate. So it's all male candidates, but they realised that a woman pointed out, and I hadn't spotted it, that the entire selection committee was male, as well as the interview panel. So we've checked, that's been fixed, but it's like constant vigilance. And events like this that get people inspired and support the community groups. But it's a long haul. I mean, I put those slides up from the 80s to show you there is nothing new. And every time someone from the media, when there's a report about, like there was the recent Commons Select Committee on women in STEM or lack of, criticising the fact that this government had taken away the funding from the UKRC, for example, the media ring me up and say, oh, what are we doing about women in computer science? I said, well, did you read the paper I published in 1987? You know, I mean, this is not new. It's still an issue, but the most important thing is don't let it be a women's issue. Just don't. I don't know about this thing about 63% in STEM being sexually harassed, because I think that would be true. I don't think there's anything special in STEM about that. I think that's across the board. But I do know about bullying in software engineering conferences, which is absolutely appalling, of the minority of women that goes to those. But I would debate those sorts of statistics. I think they're a red herring, personally. But that's my view.
Hello, my name is Badur, and I must say first, I really did enjoy your talk and your little stories. So I have a question for you. So when I was doing my undergraduate degree in computer information systems, in my programming module, there were over 50 students, and all of them were women. But then again, I went to an all-girls uni in Saudi Arabia.
Can I talk to you about whether I should go to Saudi Arabia or not?
Oh yeah, definitely. I'd love to talk to you afterwards. But then again, I mean, that program was optional, that module was optional, but it was ridiculously popular. So I was wondering, do you think that the reason that that module was popular is because like a lot of women felt comfortable programming with other women?
Interesting question. This is the same question about the all-girls school thing. I went to an all-girls grammar school because that's what existed in those days. I was lucky to pass my 11+. This is all very old-fashioned. And so I never knew anything about the fact that women didn't do science until after I got to my PhD. I didn't even think about it because I had wonderful science teachers and I was in a group of women and you know, physics was physics and it was great. And so there are issues around that. My only experience of the Middle East is when the ACM, we went on a trip to Qatar when I was president, and we went to the University of Qatar engineering department, and there were all these beautiful women I'd never seen. I now know why handbags and shoes are so expensive, because they wear the beautiful black, and they've got the eyes, and they have a designer handbag. You know, but all those black gowns have little bits of lace that mark them out to be different. I really learned quite a lot, and actually seeing, you know, a man in white and a woman in black walking down the road together is just artistically wonderful. But then, okay, you dig down. So when we went to, we addressed the men and women together, although there were parts where women could choose to be segregated or their families could. But anyway, that's another whole story. Each country is different. But basically, we were talking to the computer science students, and 70%, 80% of them were women in this class in Qatar. And they were loving it. They were so enthusiastic. They were telling us about all the work they were doing. They were desperate for information about what they could do for careers and so on. And you dig a little deeper and you realise that a lot of the men in their peer group are being educated in America, but the women aren't allowed to go. So, and they also saw that computing was because they talked to us about it, a subject that they could use to work. They could work in computers and have a family. But I haven't really answered your question. It's just that was my experience, was that I walk in and I see, wow, there's all these women doing computing, and then you dig a little bit deeper and you realise there's a reason why. There isn't one we would like, because they don't have the option to go. Now, that was my one experience. So you're talking about, I think, see, coming from an all-girls school, I think there's huge advantages to women learning science and maths in all-girls groups. But then I wouldn't advocate segregated education, so it's a really complex issue.
I have people yelling
There's
at me
a lady
about
there.
just one last question, and then
Okay.
sorry, people could ask you questions
Yeah,
all day.
I'm here all day except when I'm shopping.
Hello, my name is Noor. I'm originally from Palestine, the Middle East, and I'm studying in Germany currently as a PhD candidate. And
So you've come over from Germany?
yes.
Wow. Go
So
on.
my question is, do you think all this attention hurts us? Because all this attention for women in science hurts us. Because I remember before my interview as for a PhD position, everyone was like, you're not going to get it. And when I got it, they were like, yeah, you got it because you're a girl. And until now, every time I get a chance that my colleagues don't get, it's because I'm a woman.
That is an incredibly important point. It's a very good question to finish on, because it is so right. As I said somewhere in the talk, when you get to every point in your career, you're being judged about how to get to the next level. And nowadays there's a sort of, the shortlist is shorter for women, because people do need diverse appointments. They need diversity in their PhD programs, on their committees, in their governments, whatever. And I get that all the time. And I really, so I only do a certain amount of this type of talk, because I really don't want to be the professor that talks about being a woman. I want to be the professor that talks about the science and the engineering that I do, and gets my awards on merit. So I'm very, very careful. I get invited to do huge amounts of talks to women's audiences. And of course I was going to say yes to this one, but I'm very careful about keeping that balance, because so when I got my FRS, people, including close colleagues, said, oh, well, of course they need their women's quota up. And that makes you feel about this big. It's another way of putting you down. I say, no, actually, I think I got that on merit. And I don't like women's prizes too much. I don't like the prize for the best woman student. I want to win the prize for the best student. And so I'm very careful again about whether I accept awards that are just for women, or, of course, I'm so old, they give me Lifetime Achievement Awards now. But, I think that is really, really important, to strive to make sure your profile is such that you know damn well you're getting that on merit, and then you can say proudly with your head held high, I got that because I'm good.